This one might be the most important of the philosophy modules of this course. It is about how we do information. We live in the information age. And so what does that mean? What even is information, and how do we use it moving forward? It has implications on media literacy. It has implications on making sense of the world around us. It has implications on communicating more effectively when we're giving information to others. There's a whole lot of very useful information here. It is very deep. So thank you so much for being here. And if you like what I'm doing here, you can send me a tip via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. Super appreciate all that. You can go to ZamboniFunk.com, get some dope ass merch. You can see the music there. There's a documentary there. A whole bunch of cool shit. Thank you for checking that out. Peace and blessings, and enjoy the show. What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for being back here with me. It is your boy Zamboni, and it is time to talk about information. It is time to talk about information extraction. This is a pretty important part of, living well in the world generally, especially now that we live in the information age. We live here in a time when people have said that data is the new coal, for example. Knowing things is an extremely important part of living effectively in the world. It's an extremely important part of doing anything in the world, even down to when it's time to do magic and all of these kinds of things. Like, getting good information about what is appropriate to do is paramount. And so that is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to get into how to navigate information, how to get good information, how to navigate that information, and how to think with the process of information extraction. So let's go ahead and get down into it. Going to get some good insight here. Now, one of the things that is really worth thinking into here sometimes is that people often think that I am psychic, and it's not that, I'm not actually psychic. I know people who are psychic. I know people who who can hear or feel or in some other way experience thoughts that are outside of them, that are other people's thoughts and feelings and stuff like this. And that's not me. It's just not what I do. But I can make it seem like I'm psychic because I have listened so thoroughly. I've just listened to what people say, and I hear it and I log what they've said, and then sometime later after they've said it, I can repeat it back to them, and they'll be like, "What? How did you know that?" And it's because I listened to them. And so what I did was I found myself in an information environment and took the important parts of that information and understood it and let it become a part of my understanding of this person or the surroundings, or maybe I let it turn into my own predictive model. And then when I can bring it back and say something about it, then a lot of people don't feel like they are being listened to. They don't feel like they're being heard on a regular basis. And so it makes it seem like I have done something really magic when really all I've done is just listened to them. And so this is essentially a module on listening, on how to listen properly and but it's not just about, if you say listen, then it sounds like hear auditory information and translate it into something that is useful or something like that. But rather, this is about being awash in information and letting that information actually inform how you get down. So let's think about that for a minute. Let's think about it. Okay, ladies, now let's get information. Information is the thing that gives the world shape. Literally, that is what that word means. Formation, to form a thing is to make it have a certain kind of shape. Right? And so information, or the thing that informs, is the stuff that gives you shape. Now, that is an extremely circular definition that just doesn't actually go anywhere until you remember that shape is the underlying metaphor for all of the world at large. Like the world that we live in is the world of forms, it's the world of shape. And shape is the underlying metaphor that just like everything that happens in the world happens as a result of the shape of the object and its relationship to other objects which are shaped in certain ways, right? And as such, then we can use information, we can use data to understand what is in the world and to let that help us to figure out how the world functions. So when you're gathering information, the purpose of gathering that information is to shape your predictive engine, or sometimes you'll hear me call that a model as well. This is a fundamental piece of how information works. Like what you're already doing, and you've been doing this your whole life. Like you, the true way is unknowable. We've talked about that for a while, but it is observable, and you can construct a model based on the observation that you have made. You can construct a predictive engine based on what you have observed in the world. When you were a baby, probably you knocked stuff off of your tray a bunch of times, and you witnessed how if you knocked stuff off the tray, then it would fall down. But you didn't know that that was going to happen until you tried it a bunch of times. You had to try it and observe, oh, shit falls down if I knock it off the tray. Interesting, right? Then that begins to shape your predictive engine about how the world functions. Well, maybe if I knock stuff off the tray on this side, then it's also going to fall down. Or maybe if I drop it out of my hand, then it's also going to fall down, right? And then that helps you to understand the world that you live in all the time. This is how you learn to walk. This is how you learn to talk. This is how you learn to exist in the world, is by generating a predictive model that then takes you on the journey that you're going to go down. So like if you want to throw a ball, then you have a concept in your mind of how a ball, especially a ball, like imagine a baseball, for example, right? That is a certain size and shape. That is a certain weight. That is a certain, it's got a certain feel in your hand, right? And then, so if you were to throw it, then it would behave in a certain way, and it would behave in a different way than if you had a balloon in your hand and tried to throw that, or if you had a napkin and tried to throw that. Like these things are going to be, and the napkin is going to be different than if you balled the napkin up and then tried to throw it at that point, right? So if you've imagined how each of these things would go, then it's because you have a predictive engine in your head that's like, oh, I have a model of how stuff actually works. And so it'll go kind of like this, right? And so you're never going to get 100% accuracy on your predictive engine. You just don't have the capacity to process all of the necessary information that it would take to get you to 100% accuracy on how stuff goes. But you can do pretty good, and pretty good will get you a pretty long way, especially if you continue to refine your model over time. What you're going to do here is you're going to generate your model, which is going to basically consist of if things are in this shape, then this flow will result from that shape. Or if we have these conditions present, then the flow that comes from that, the outcomes that come out from those conditions will be in this certain kind of form, right? So that's like how your predictive model is going to go all ways. If I've got a baseball in my hand and I throw it with this kind of vigor or force, then it's going to have this kind of effect on the environment. This is going to be the outcome of that, right? And that is a super technical way of understanding what you already knew intuitively, right? This is going to be true about all of the information that you take in. You're going to be working on, okay, so if this is the way that things are shaped, then the flow that comes out of that is going to be in that shape, right? And so then when we do that, across time. And you're always going to do this across time, right? You're always going to sort of like start in a certain condition and stuff is going to happen to it and then it's going to flow out from that. But when you do that, then what you've really constructed is a story or a narrative that's always going to be like when you include time, then you're always going to have a narrative of it started this way and it moved into that thing. It's always going to move along a certain kind of narrative storyline. And so that is the only way that humans can understand things. I am not sure that it is limited to humans. I think that this is likely, I think that the reason that humans have developed story as a way of understanding things is because that is inherent in the world. I can't prove that. And so I'm not going to die on that hill, but I think that's what's going on. And I think that that is why you can use stories to shape the world around you, even if it is not in a necessarily human context. You can involve other spirits and beings in that, and you can invoke a story, and story will make sense still because story exists in that sort of metaphorical level. However, I do know that no matter if that's true or not, humans, which is where we are, we're in human bodies at this point, then humans can only understand things in the form of story and narrative. If this, then that. And so we're always going to sort of come back to what is the story, what is the narrative, and what is the shape that causes, or what is the shape that leads to a certain kind of flow. Causation is not well understood by humans. We don't really understand why things happen the way that they do, but we can understand that a certain shape will lead to a certain flow or outcome, right? And so whenever we're talking about someone who is smart, or we're talking about smartness, then that is in relationship to predictive accuracy. That is in relationship to the model accurately predicting the outcomes. That's what smart is. So with this in mind, it's good to remember that nobody does better than about 70%. You just don't there's going to be time, there's going to be wind that you didn't think about when you were throwing the ball or the napkin or something like that. It's going to sometimes come out of your hand in a way that you didn't predict exactly, because even the motion of your body isn't 100% the way that you thought it was going to go in your mind. And like, there's always going to be stuff, and just stuff you didn't think about. There's a thing on the side of the ball that's going to like make it be a little bit lopsided, and it's, like there's always going to be stuff, right? And you can refine your knowledge so that you get better and better. But when it comes to predicting future outcomes, nobody does better than 70%. So try to get up to 70%. A lot of people do way worse than 70%. You can get that good. You can get as smart as 70% accuracy in your predictive model. Try to get that good with it. So what you're going to need to do here in order to get good insight from the information that is available is you're going to need to distinguish between signal and noise. Noise is going to be basically all of the information. We are awash in information all the time. And because we live in a complex system, or we live embedded in many layers of complex systems, which is to say that like the human body is a complex system. It is not well understood by humans. We understand it, maybe to the point of 70%. I think that's running a little high in my opinion, but like, let's say 70%. That means there's 30% of stuff going on in the human body that is not understood by humans. And so this is why, like you can make claims about nutrition or medicine or something like that, and you can make claims about averages, but there are going to be plenty of outliers when it comes to individual cases, because you just don't know everything, right? There's a lot of information. And so that's a complex system. There's a complex system versus a complicated system. A complicated system is going to be like your phone or some feat of engineering, right? So a a toaster or a phone or some other machine that's been created by a person is going to be maybe difficult to understand, maybe complicated, maybe there's a bunch of stuff going on there, but it is ultimately understandable in total, which is why if your phone breaks or something like that, you can take it to a technician, and somebody who does know how the system works will be like, oh, this is how the system works, and can put the thing back together or replace a part or something like that, because they can identify what the issue is confidently and make the thing turn back on or whatever it is, right? Internal combustion engines and cars are this way and this kind of stuff, right? They are a complicated system, but not complex systems in the way that forests are complex systems. There's a bunch of stuff going on in the forest that you're not going to be able to understand and predict at all times. There's going to be wind currents that are going to be changing and that are going to be moving around, and moisture, and there's going to be all kinds of unexpected stuff going on. So imagine, for example, that you're doing a science experiment. You're in the forest and you're trying to observe a thing. And so you're sitting there and you're like watching, and then a tree falls on your experiment. That tree has been there for 100 years or something like that. There was no way to know that this tree was going to fall today, right in this spot where I have made my experiment happen. You know what I mean? Like, that is the difference between a complex system and a complicated system. Is complex systems inherently contain that mystery and unpredictability to them, right? And so if you are in a human body, in a forest, in a weather system, on an Earth that is a living organism, in a galaxy that is like, we are embedded in many layers of complex systems, and complex systems are, because we are in so many complex systems, we are awash in information that is too much. It's too much information. You can't know all the stuff. There's just too much information, and even if it's not, let's make it simple and put you inside of a static room, like you're just inside the room and there's not that much going on there. Even still, there's going to be way too much information for you to take in and comprehend at any given moment. And so what you're going to do is you're going to focus on something and you're going to extract what we would call signal from the noise. Noise is all of the information which, because it is so much information, it turns into noise. It just turns into background noise and you can't process all of it. But when you look at something and you focus and you create a narrative frame that matters to you, then the information arranges itself so that you can understand what's going on. And so the metaphor that I've used continuously throughout this time is like, let's say that you want to walk across the room, then there's way too much stuff in the room for you to pay attention to if what you want to do is walk across the room. So what you do is you pay attention to your footfalls. You pay attention to where you are going to put your feet. And if there's something in the way, then that is important, relevant information. And if there's something on the wall, like a poster on the wall or something like that, then that is irrelevant information. It becomes noise, right? So ultimately, when we start to think causally, right, which is something that you'll necessarily engage in when you're working on a predictive model of the universe, you need to figure out causation, but you can't figure out causation because everything causes everything. Everything is in the shape that it's in and moving at the rate that it's moving. And because of that, then the next thing happens. But that's too much information to understand. And so what you do is, it is necessary to choke the information flow. It is necessary to, like, this is also the way that I like to understand astrology, because astrology is another complex system and it is huge. And, do you limit what you look at? Do you look at 7 traditional planets? Do you look at 10 planets, including the modern planets? Do you look at asteroids? Do you look at comets? Do you look at fixed stars? Do you look at declination? There's an endless amount of stuff in the sky. There's so much stuff in the sky, right? So, but in order to understand astrology well, then it's necessary to come back and look at your foundational stuff and then and not look at all the other stuff, especially if you're a new astrologer. If you're a brand new astrologer, then trying to get in there and look at asteroids and look at all these sort of like minor objects in the sky, it can confuse you if you don't have a solid foundation of planet signs, houses, and aspects, right? So you start with your planet signs, houses, aspects, your like very foundational basic stuff, and then you build on top of that. So what you do is you block out all the other information. You choke the flow of information. Think of a faucet, right? If you've got all the information, then it's a waterfall just coming out the faucet. And it's like, yo, this is too much water. I got a flood going on. Now that I got a mold in the bathroom, and you know what I mean? It turns into a problem. So what you need to do is you need to choke that flow. So there's only the amount of water coming out that you need, right? And you choke that information flow the same way that you would choke the flow of water in a faucet, right? And the way that you do that is you define your goal. A well-defined goal distinguishes signal from the noise in your information suit. Now, what's interesting about this is that if you define your goal in one way, then you will find that this information is signal and the rest is noise. But then if you redefine your goal, then what used to be signal may now become noise, and what had been noise might become signal. So I mentioned stuff that might be on the floor versus stuff that might be on the wall, right? Things that would obstruct your ability to get across the room versus decorations that might be on the wall. Now, if you're trying to get across the room, then stuff that's on the floor is pertinent information, and that becomes signal. You need to deal with that. You need to find a way to step around it. You need to move the stuff, right? Like you need to interact with that. And then whatever's on the wall might be pretty or whatever, but you don't really notice it because it's not pertinent to what you're actually trying to do. But if what you're trying to do is engage with art, and there's some art on the wall, and you want to look at it, and you want to feel feelings, and you want to like look at something that is pretty, or whatever else the art might make you feel, then what's on the floor becomes irrelevant. It's no longer, you don't care what's on the floor anymore, because what you're doing is you're looking at this piece of art, right? And so signal and noise is relative to your goal. So what you're going to have to do all the time is you're going to have to set a goal. Setting goals is crucial at all times. It's annoying how crucial goal setting is at all times. You always have to start with a goal. And so why are you engaging this information in the first place? Like, what are you trying to get out of this information? And that can be, like environmental information in the way that we've been discussing so far, or it can be a book that you're reading, or it can be a video essay that you're looking, or podcasts that you're listening to, or anything like this, right? The news. Are you like watching the news? Why are you watching the news? What do you hope to get out of this? What is your goal here, right? There is always a goal. This is hiding in plain sight because it's the, like, you look on the floor instinctively, intuitively, to understand like where you can put your feet and where you can't put your feet. Also, if you don't look on the floor, then you're at a good risk. You're at a high risk of stubbing your toe on something or like this, right? And this is everybody knows this. Everybody's figured this one out, right? And sometimes you don't do it anyway, and you stub your toe, and you're like, what have I done, right? So and that's because your goal was misplaced in that moment. You were thinking about something else while you were doing something that required more attention, right? So if you can get your information extraction to be where you need it to be, then that will help you to understand what is going on in your environment and how you can best interact with that, right? So always align your goal with the information that's coming in. And honestly, once you define your goal, the information will arrange itself. So what you really need to do is you need to get into your head, what is an appropriate goal for me? And then think into that and go there. Now, sometimes the goal is to be entertained. Sometimes you're watching TV and you just like wanna, and you're taking in information, right? Information is going to come in the form of stories if you're watching TV or movies or something like that. But then there's also going to be imagery that's involved in those places and all this, right? Like there's so much information that's going to be there. And sometimes what you want is to be entertained by that. Now, it's worth noting that information, even if it's just to be entertained, just is doing a lot of heavy lifting in a sentence like that, right? But even if it's just to be entertained, then you are still being informed by the information that you take in. And it is well worth attending to that accordingly, like paying proper attention to the way that information is coming in is going to be a real big deal. And so this, as I was writing this talk, I just kept fractaling. I just kept like branching off into this or that topic, just like trying to, because like I'm thinking about maybe doing a whole thing on media literacy, because there's a whole bunch of stuff. Like if we're going to be hanging out in a media environment that is maybe something akin to a fast food environment or something like this, right? A fast media environment where we're getting a bunch of maybe trash, low calorie information that isn't, or low nutrition density information, we could say, then what kind of effect does that have, and then what are some ways out of that? That's going to be a real important skill when navigating this information environment. So there's no end to the depth of things that can be learned by paying attention to this, but it's well worth asking this, like the next time you find yourself scrolling TikTok or something like this, then it might be a good idea to be like, what am I trying to do here? What is my goal about this? Or the next time you find yourself looking at news and being mad at the news or something like this, like, what is my goal here? What do I want to get from this information? And have I gotten it? Have I maybe gotten what I need from this information? Can I maybe move on and do something else and see about learning something else? This is going to be an important thing to sort of remember all throughout here. The core thesis here is that you are always, as you take in information, you are always informing and therefore shaping your predictive engine. And so always you want to make sure that you are informing your predictive engine in a way that suits you, that benefits you. And in order to do that, as always, one of the things that we always come back to in this course is a certain amount of humility. Because you are just a small person. There's a whole wide world out here, but I'm just one person. And so I know that I do not have the capacity to know all of the things. Even in my small static room, I'll be looking at the floor and not the wall, or the wall and not the floor. I can't do both of those things at the same time. And I can't process all of that doesn't even take into account the countertops, or, you know what I mean? Like there's a whole bunch of stuff in the room that I can't pay attention to all at the one time. And as such, then that means that there's a whole bunch of stuff that I don't know. And I'm going to miss a bunch. If 70% is where the very smartest of the people get to about 70% accuracy, then I'm probably somewhere around like 45% or something like that, right? That means I'm missing more than I'm hitting. And that It's hard on my little ego. It's hard on my heart, right? But it's really good to remember that. And, you know, there is, I heard Tom Bilyeu say that there's one belief that matters, and it is that I know that I can learn things and do better next time, right? Not, I don't necessarily need to tie my self-worth to what I know and how good my predictive model is. Rather, I can tie my self-worth to my ability to become better over time. This is really important. This is really, really important when you are navigating in an information environment. The main thing is to remember that I don't know everything, but I can learn things. And I can learn things by taking in information with the intention of improving my predictive model. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to start from a kind of foundational place and get your first principles in order. You want to know what you know, and you need to be able to justify the things that you think you know. Now, I just spent a bunch of time talking about how you don't actually know anything and how you're going to miss a bunch of times, right? But if you are hitting consistently in a certain area, then it's worth being like, okay, my predictions are pretty like if I'm so certain right now that things are going to fall downward, right? That is a real good place to start. If what you need to do is you need to move your body around, then knowing that stuff falls down, that's a strong first principle. And so then we're going to use that as a foundational concept in order to build off of that and do other things. If you want to run, jump, climb things, all of that, right? Like, and we all did this as children, right? So like we got a lot of that in, you know, and had to fall a whole bunch of times. How many times did I think I had it down and then tripped on the curb and then messed my whole skin, my knees, my elbows, and my hands up and all that? How many times did I have to go through that, right? But in doing that, then now I'm much nicer with curbs, right? Because I know how to do that kind of thing now. So because I know that I can learn things, right? That's how I've proved to myself that I can learn things, by falling a bunch of times and being like, okay, I don't got to fall on that curb no more. I can figure this out. I can do this, right? So you figure out your first principles, you figure out what you know, and you be able to justify those things. Now, this is really important because there is a lot going on in the information landscape right now that is, and probably for all times, maybe it's just right now, but I'm gonna guess that it's like a long-term situation where the information landscape has split into teams. So this camp thinks this kind of way, and that camp thinks that kind of way, and like kind of never the twain shall meet a little bit, right? They just like talk shit on each other back and forth. And this is from a political standpoint, but then there's also like a cultural standpoint. There's young folks versus old folks. There's white folks versus black folks. There's like there's all kinds of teams and divisions that people are going to sort of like bicker about one way back and forth, right? And so before you get on a team and just sort of like repeat the talking points, it's going to be worth having an analysis of why that thing is true. Why does that thing, like, how does that concept work in your wider predictive model of how the world works? And so if you've got a good understanding of how stuff works, then you can sort of take that, and as new information comes in, then you're going to run it through your predictive model and be like, well, does this make sense? You know, think about a math problem that you do in elementary school or something like that. You know, you do like 1 + 1 = 11. Well, like, does that make sense? If you start with 1 and you put 1 more with it, do you have 11 now? You know, like, does this make sense? Right? And so, but because of your understanding of one and one, then you put that together, and then you have an understanding of 11. It's like, well, hold on a minute. These things don't quite make sense. What am I doing wrong here, right? So this is, it's really important to remember that when nonsensical information comes in, you can determine that it is nonsensical by running it through your predictive model and noticing that it doesn't actually make sense in the way that it would need to if it were true. Now, the other thing that can happen is maybe your model is wrong. Maybe your predictive model is wrong. And when new information comes in, you have to go, oh, hold on a minute. What is wrong with my predictive model if I'm getting these outcomes, right? It's really good, especially if you can like run an experiment or something like that. Like, how can I run an experiment a couple of different times if it's repeatable? Be like, okay, well, this outcome continues to happen, and so that means that I'm not thinking about things properly. How can I reshape, reinform my model in order to incorporate this other information that is clearly true, right? So again, that gets back to the humility of it, right? Like, I don't necessarily know that I don't know everything. And so how am I going to make my model better? Well, by figuring out where it's wrong, and then and being open to figuring out where my model is wrong, and then updating the model, and then trying a next experiment and being like, okay, now is it consistent? You know what I mean? What you want is consistency between predictions and outcomes. So one thing that is helpful to think with in the case of an argument that doesn't match up with your predictive model is to think into, okay, well, so if that were true, then what else would have to be true in order for that to work? Like, if you can think outside of just this one line of inquiry and think about the cloud of, because you're in a complex system, right? There's a whole bunch of other ways, angles of approach. And it'd be like, okay, well, so if we came over here, then this would have to be true in that same universe where this thing is happening. Then how can we understand that? Like, what would have to be true outside of just this in order for that thing that seems like an outlier to me? If that's true, then what else would have to be true? And then you can sort of test that thing and see if you can either hold your predictive model together, because all right, so let's say that a thing has to be true in order for a claim to be true, right? So you can't necessarily test the claim directly, but you can test this other thing that would necessarily have to be true in order for that to take place. And so you can test that in order to get information about your claim, right? And so being able to be nimble in this way is a good way for you to sort of get important and useful insight in order to move yourself through the world in a more effective kind of way. Especially in an environment where you're not necessarily looking at like hard outcomes. By hard outcomes, I mean things that are not subject to argumentation, but that are like sort of more solid. Like, think about, I brought up internal combustion engines before, right? If your engine isn't starting, and then there's a reason why that's not starting. And so if you do a certain number of things or a certain kind of thing to it, then it'll start again. And if you don't do those things, then it won't start again, right? And so that is fundamentally different from the idea of like, if I can just make my point really well and argue effectively, then I'll win hearts and minds, and then be considered right. being considered right by an authority or a group of people is different than getting the engineering component right in an internal combustion engine or something like that, right? It's well worth distinguishing between those two kinds of things, right? So when you're not in hard engine space, but rather in argumentation space, which is not, it's like you're going to spend some time there, you know, like that's where I'm at right now is like I'm in philosophy and like, well, I think this is what's going on kind of space. Like you're going to spend some time in this space, and it's not better or worse than the other kind of space. It's just going to be like it's worth distinguishing between them. If you are in argumentation space, then it is still useful to lead with humility, because then you can still learn from people whose ideas you find abhorrent, or maybe you find the people themselves abhorrent. Maybe you think that they are terrible people with terrible motives and ideals, right? But they might get they might get something right, right? Even a broken clock is right twice a day, right? And how sure are you that you are the functional clock and that they're the broken clock? You know what I mean? If you can stay in that humble space of like, okay, well, maybe I'm wrong about things. I miss more than I hit. So maybe I'm wrong this time. What would be a way to think with what they're talking about, right? It's always going to be a good idea to listen to someone make an argument and let them make their argument in the way that is the best that they can do it. It's really good to identify what else or what another person is saying, what their argument is, what they want you to think, what they want you to believe. This is also going to be true in like, it's helpful to think with this in entertainment space, you know, where there's going to be music going on, or there's going to be sound effects happening, and there's going to be a certain kind of vibe, and the coloration is going to be a certain kind of way, and these kinds of things. Like the author, the director, the creator of the text wants you to think or feel a certain way. And it's useful to be able to identify, okay, these things are taking place here, and I am meant to think or feel this kind of way, right? This is one of, I think that this is super useful, especially like in a trash TV context, because a lot of times trash TV is, you know, it's trashy. So it's, it tends to be like pretty campy and over the top. And as such, the tropes and understandings are pretty like surface level visible, but it won't necessarily be like the dialogue or the story or something like that. So you gotta like, if you can just notice what's happening, then that can help you to understand what it, and if there is problematic messaging or something like that, then it can help you to identify and dodge some of that and not let those problems inform your models quite as much. That has been super useful to me, especially in contexts where I can't necessarily avoid that kind of thing because I'm at a family event or something like this and the TV's on or some, you know, like this kind of thing. Then, because I'm pretty strict about like I don't watch certain kinds of things or I don't listen to certain kinds of things because I am concerned that I will let them inform my predictive model in ways that will make my predictive model worse, which is totally possible. That is a thing that can happen in the world. And so I don't want that to happen to me and my predictive model. So I'm pretty like, I keep my blinders on sometimes, but can't always do that. Sometimes there'll be situations where I'm involved in a space or something like that and just navigate. And then, you know, it's also just helpful to be able to look at stuff and be like, okay, I see what you're saying there. And I've got my first principles in order. And here's why that is not the wave. You know, like that kind of thing is worth doing. But in order to be able to make that point, I need to be able to understand what that text, what that author is trying to put forth, right? What is their argument? What are they actually trying to say? And it's really good to, rather than just being on a team and being like, boo, those are the bad guys and I don't, and like everything they say is vile trash. Rather than doing that, it's useful to be like, okay, well, what about this is resonant? What about this is good? It's worth remembering that, like, like comic book villains is not how we actually got to the state of the world that we're in right now. We got to the state of the world that we're in right now, which basically everybody assume or understands is something of a crisis point. The way that we got here was by, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. People are doing their best for the most part, and often their best, often your best, often my best, fucking sucks. And so, like plenty of times I have intended to do good and then actually did things that were harmful or problematic in some kind of way, right? It's what I think it is a good idea to extend that same grace to other people who are trying to do their best and who create harm or problems in the process, right? So if you can come at it from that angle, being like, those are people and they're doing people things and they're doing the best, and then you can look at it and be like, okay, so here's the maybe emotional motivation that's going on there. Here's the thing that they're trying to say with this text. And then after you have created a strong argument, or you've like understood their argument, then you can be like, okay, well, and here's where they missed the stuff. They missed this point entirely, and there's this other thing that they're making this claim that isn't necessarily true, because and it's provable that that's not true because you can look at this thing and that thing, right? So the way that you can look here is by being solid about your first principles and the way that you can justify your own understanding of the world, your own predictive model. If there's a discrepancy between your predictive model and the arguments that are being made, then you should be able to be like, okay, well, here's what you're missing here. And in this argument that you're making, like there's problems with the argument rather than there's problems with the person, and therefore we can't listen to anything they have to say, because people who cause harm are frequently brilliant on such and such a thing. Like the people will have great ideas and then also be terrible people, or like terrible to their spouses or families or something like that. You know what I mean? Like just being mean does not stop people from having great ideas. Being nice does not mean that people have great ideas, right? These things are not the same thing. And so if it's worth looking at arguments unto themselves, figure out what the argument is, steelman it, do your best job making the case that you disagree with. And when you can do your best job making that case, then that helps you to understand what's going on over there, and you might inform your predictive model. Sometimes people who you disagree with will have a point that is missing from your model, even if you disagree with the main thrust of their point. There might be a piece there that is worth incorporating into your own model, and you learn so much that way. It's really, really worthwhile, really worth doing there. So, and then another thing is that it is like disagreeing perspectives can still be useful as basic research. So like it's good for understanding what is the landscape of ideas in the space. How does the argument that I disagree with, how does that argument go? And when that argument comes up later, you can help to identify that by having gone through this argument and being like, okay, yes, I've seen this line of argumentation before, and here's why that doesn't work. Like you can just sort of like come to it quickly by engaging with the argument and coming to understand that this is the landscape of arguments in this space. So I just said a term, basic research there. This is very important. So there are two different ways of getting at information, of researching things. It's basic research versus applied research, and these are scientific terms. So basic research teaches you about the way. Scientists would not say it that way, but basic research teaches you about the way in a general way. And it's not always clear how that might be useful later. It just teaches you about like what exists in the world. I like to think about this as play. You just poke around. You just get in there and be like, what's happening in here? What is like when you get into a place or into some kind of environment, then something will pique your interest. And then you just explore that. And then it's like, then the more that you explore that space and you explore what you're interested there, then then you gain experience. And as you gain experience, and then you'll be like, oh, well, I guess if things come into this shape or these conditions are present, then this flows from that. Huh. What if I do this? And then like, oh, so what if I knock it off the tray over here? Does it still fall down? Like what? That is play. That's exploration. That is basic research. Basic research is just figuring out what exists at all. This is basic research. This is distinguished from applied research, which is toward a defined goal. It's when you want to know how to accomplish an aim. It is an engineering perspective, right? So it's the idea that like, I want a particular outcome. I want a particular flow. And so how do I shape things in order to generate that flow? This is, it's instrumental in its focus. There is a way to succeed and there's a way to fail at it. This is more of the, like, I want the engine to start again, right? This is less like just poking around and being like, what's an engine made of? Like, whatever, like if you can get in there and you can play around, you can take stuff apart and just be like, oh, I guess this goes in here. Well, I guess there's all, like you can just like fuck around and see what's going on in there. But that is different from, I want the thing to start again. And so how do I get it to start again? What is impeding that? Or how do I create a thing that starts in the first place? How do I create an engine, right? An internal combustion engine. How do I make this happen, right? I have an idea in my head and I want that to come to fruition. How do I make that happen? That is applied research, right? So both of these ways of approaching information are important. The tech for navigating them is distinct. They are different ways of approaching information and different ways of approaching the environment generally. On one hand, you've got play, exploration, and on the other hand, you've got engineering and exploitation. By exploitation, I mean like I have a certain amount of knowledge and I want to leverage that information in order to achieve an outcome, a predefined outcome. So I have found that it is useful to think of these things as yin and yang, respectively, right? So you've got your basic research, which is a little more yin, and you've got your applied research, which is a little more yang. And just like your Tai Chi symbol, which is your circle with the wave in between them, right? What you're gonna do is you're gonna surf. You're gonna surf that wave between them. You're gonna sometimes be a little more on the applied side, and sometimes you're gonna be a little more on the basic side. But there's gonna be some flow in between there, even when you're playing, right? Maybe you're playing around and maybe you create a game and then now we're out here playing soccer, right? And so you're still playing, you're still having fun, you're still like seeing what's possible, but you also like want to get good at kicking the ball in a particular direction, right? Because it's more useful to you to move it in that direction. But you're also out there learning how to like, well, I guess if I do this move, then that really upsets the other guys. And then when I upset the other guys, then I get these they treat me in this kind of way, and that wasn't really what I thought it was going to be, right? So there's both basic and applied research, both exploration and exploitation live in that space, right? And so it's worth being open to both of those things and using the appropriate tech at the appropriate moment. So if you're trying to fix your internal combustion engine, then you're going to want to go way more exploit than explore, right? Because you have a clearly defined goal that is, especially in that case, it's a complicated system. It's not a complex system. So there's less of a sense of discovery of what's going on and more a sense of like, let me follow the rules. It's baking, right? It's baking versus, like, I work at a bar, so like cocktail recipes or something like that. Like, well, let's try putting a little of that in there, and like let's see if we can bring out the lime in it, or like, you know what I mean, like all that sort of stuff. So there are certain rules that you're going to want to follow, and that have been established. But even if you don't know those rules, then you can like get in there and you still make a delicious cocktail sometimes, right? And so it's good to be able to exercise both your explore and exploit. Know which one is which and do the right thing at the right time. Navigate according to which mode you need to be in primarily, but always remembering that you're never going to be 100% in this or that space. You're always going to be surfing the line, the wave in between them. So, as you are navigating your information landscape, then you are always going to understand your information contextually. That is to say that you are always going to take your data points and you're going to put them in context with a bunch of other data points. Your information never exists alone. Your information always exists in relationship to other stuff, right? There is no real understanding of, let's think of an example here. Like there's no understanding of anything without without understanding what other things it could be related to. If you've got a plant that you're trying to grow, then like that is in a lineage of plants, and it's is it a fern? Is it a flowering plant? Is it a tree? Is it, like there's always going to be context to whatever information you have. The marketing author Rory Sutherland talks about if you try to sell a supercar at a car show, then you're not going to sell any of them because you've got a hugely, you've got like a $900,000 car competing against, $200,000 and $300,000 cars. But if you take that same $900,000 car and you put it at an air show where they're selling airplanes or they're selling boats or yachts or something like that, then now this $900,000 is a low number. And so you sell more cars this way because it's all about context, right? And so this is the way that we always will understand all of the information that we get. And so the best way to effectively know things and to frame information, the best way to extract signal from noise is to create a narrative frame. You can encode so much information as a story. It's a really great way to densely pack information. Now, you can also use image and metaphor, but even those things generally require a narrative component to them, right? So, if you look at, like a Renaissance painting or something like that, then you'll see a character, you'll see somebody in the image, and the character will frequently be holding an object and doing a thing, right? And so holding the object gives you some context as to like who the person is and what kind of things they're interested in, and then they're maybe engaged in some kind of situation, and maybe they're in motion or something like that. So it's understood that something has happened before this, something is happening now, something will happen after this, and maybe the tool that this person is holding is relevant to all of that stuff. And maybe there's birds flying, or maybe there's rain falling or something like that, right? And that's all going to give you context. But even there, I'm using a gerund. Rain is falling. They are holding a thing, right? So they're in the process of doing that. So you're always going to be sort of like wrapped up in narrative and story, right? This is really good for densely packaging information. And then when it's time to understand the information, then you can look at each piece of it. You can carefully examine each piece of it, and you can unravel all of the information that's packed in there. But you don't necessarily have to describe it in this long form every time. You can pack it in there in these ways where the images contain lots of information, or parables will contain a lot of information, and then you can learn things from that are not immediately intelligible. So that requires some kind of examination to unravel the mysteries of it, right? This is why religious texts are understood in story, right? It's because because story is the only way that we understand anything. But if you tell a story that goes a certain way, then you can extrapolate from that story lots of different things that can be applicable in lots of different circumstances. And they don't necessarily have to be exactly the same in order to understand the parallels of this real life circumstance versus this religious story or parable or something like this, right? So the understanding of stories unravels in this way that can show you densely packed information that can come through in a matter of minutes. You can read a religious story in a few minutes a lot of times, but then there's so much packed in there that it might merit a few times reading over or something like that. And honestly, novels and movies and lots of artistic works follow this same format, right? It's a really good way for communicating to others what you have learned in a way that isn't prosaic data and tables and all that, right? Data and tables isn't really intelligible in a way that a narrative is intelligible. And so by encoding information as story, then you can literally shape the world around you. You can inform your world. You can inform others by shaping your own narrative, your way of understanding things. And then also, you can get into image magic and shit like that. Like you can create images that represent certain methods of being in the world, or represent certain outcomes or feelings or something like this. And you can create things that move, like you can shape the world around you by creating images. There's that's what the Picatrix is, right? Picatrix magic is all about sort of basically you wish upon a star, right? Like you find a star that is in a perfect condition, or a planet that's in an excellent condition, and then you create an image of that. So let's say that Jupiter's in Cancer right now. So let's say that, and that's an exaltation position. That's a really nice Jupiter position. Jupiter is the planet of joy, luck, and abundance, and tends to look toward expansion and improvement and all this sort of stuff, right? So you want some expansion and improvement in your life. And so you find a moment when Jupiter is exalted in Cancer and is also super prominent in the sky, maybe on the eastern horizon or maybe on the midheaven or something like this. And it looks real good, and you want to see what's up with this Jupiter. And so so you've got this great moment, and then you inscribe an image of Jupiter. And so then you're going to have to be like, okay, well, what is an image of Jupiter? Well, you could do a bright star. Jupiter is a bright star. Or you could do, like one that I used for a while was a man holding a bow riding an eagle, and so there the idea is that you've got this like archer whose goal is to aim and shoot at a target, and eagles are very good at seeing and honing in on a target, and are majestic creatures, right? And so then you can take this sort of sense of royalty, or the sense of like an ability to soar, and soar especially toward a particular goal, and to hit that goal and achieve that thing in a kind of glorious, bright kind of way, right? And so that's embedded in that image. Or a different image that I used for Jupiter one time was two streams flowing into one another. That one was a Jupiter and Pisces. And so Pisces is a water sign, and so Jupiter in the water, and then the idea of like coming together and confluence, working together, like that sort of thing. And then I ended up with a team of people who created a documentary film about me, and we also have a live concert that's associated with that also. So so what happened was the world shaped itself into this place where confluence of emotions and creative energy all worked together into the one stream, right? And so by encoding information as image, metaphor, and story, then I was able to shape the world around me. And this is also true anytime you tell a story and you get a laugh, or you create a sense of tension and sorrow, or anything else. Anytime you're telling a story and it is giving the people around you a certain sense of how to feel or something like that, then you are shaping the world around you, and you're literally creating the world around you. And in doing that, then you have an effect on the world that you live in. And so this is an important responsibility that you should take seriously. So as always, we got to talk about questions. You got to think with, so if you are taking in information, then it's often useful to know what kinds of questions an information source is asking, right? So like if you are taking note of an argument or a story that someone is telling, and it's like, okay, they're sort of like revolving around a particular concept. What is that concept, and what is the question that you're navigating with this? Sometimes the premise will be real good. It'll be a really interesting question. It'll be something worth looking into. Some other times it's not going to be, right? That's going to be your disagreement or your discrepancy situation, where you're like paying attention to someone's story or argument, and you're like, this isn't really it, right? Like, like how important is it to know what this source is asking for is a great way to, a lot of times when I engage a source of information that I don't like very much, then I find myself being like, this is just asking a question that doesn't matter. And so like maybe these things are true, but like you're spending a bunch of time on something that is irrelevant to maybe my life, or to the thing that's the actual situation, like if we're looking at health outcomes or political outcomes or this kind of thing, right? Like a lot of times people will get focused on the wrong thing. And so if you're focused on the wrong thing, then you like spend all this time and effort working on something and like working out a logical argument for something that just is irrelevant. And so it's always good to ask, is this question worth asking at all? And if not, what on this subject might be a more effective question? A good way to think with this is like, okay, so if we're in this arena, then would be what would I want to know in order to be more effective in this arena? Like if I were trying to develop a system that were, if you're looking at a political system or, should funding go to this or that thing or something like that, then it's like, okay, well, in order to be effective, what would I actually want to know? And thinking through those kinds of questions is really helpful. Or like maybe you've got a medical situation, right? Like maybe you've got a situation where you're like, okay, um, I don't, let's see, let's say you've got a breathing problem. And you're like, okay, what would I want to know in order to breathe more effectively? Well, it would be cool to know about lungs, like how do lungs work? What are lungs made of and how do lungs work? What about air? Air seems like it's pretty important to breath. Okay, cool. So like let's think about air and air quality and stuff like that, right? So thinking through what would actually be effective in order, what would be information that would make me more effective in this arena. If I want to improve my outcomes, then what information would I want to know in order to be effective in this space? Then, it's real worth thinking into, especially in the case of a disagreement or something like that. Like, okay, I don't think that what that person is saying is true, or I'm not accepting what they're saying about it. So what evidence would convince me? What would I need to see in order for me to be convinced that this argument is true? That kind of thing is also super effective in helping you to understand your own position better in order to be more effective in the world. And that's what we're really trying to do, right? We're trying to improve the predictive model so that when you make good predictions in the world, you are more effective in the world at large. Because you know that things fall down, then you can set them on the table in such a way that you account for them trying to go down all the time, right? That makes you more effective as a person in the world at large. Then when you've got good questions to ask, then you can get into the fun stuff like divination, right? There's a whole bunch of stuff. There's a lot of important, pertinent information that you're not in position to see because you are blinded by your humanity a lot of times. You're just not in position to understand the way that things work, or the way that someone else is thinking about things, or the context of the wider context of the situation and that sort of thing. And occult sources can give you some insight into how that kind of stuff works. So astrology can tell you what time it is. It can tell you what time it is right now in this context, in this circumstance, in this moment. It can give context to the moment that you're in, or it can help you to understand who you are as a person, or what your talents and natural strengths are versus your natural weaknesses and the things that the traps that you are prone to falling into, that sort of thing. You can read cards. You can make sense of a particular situation or a relationship. Cards are really good also for tactical advice. What if I do this thing? If I so I've got this problem that I'm trying to solve, and I'm thinking about solving it in this way. What is the outcome of if I take this method of approach versus taking that method of approach, or something like that? Cards can be really good at that. Coins, I find, are really useful to look inside of your own heart, and this, my example that I use all the time is so fucking useful, and it's so mundane. Like, I discovered this in a Mexican restaurant. I was in a Mexican restaurant and I couldn't decide between the tacos and the enchiladas, and I was like, I don't know what to do. And so I flipped a coin, and then and so like I just assigned them. I think what I did and what I typically do now, what I customarily do is I let the coin tell me what it is. And so I'll flip the coin first to be like, okay, so show me what tacos look like. And so I flip the coin and it's like heads. Okay, cool. If I get heads, then I'm going with tacos. Flip the coin, get tails. Now it's telling me to get the enchiladas. In my heart, I went, oh, and that told me that what I really wanted was tacos the whole time. I didn't, there's, for whatever reason, I like felt some kind of way. I didn't want to like be mean to the enchiladas. I don't want the enchiladas to feel left out. And so I was like including them in this race when I knew the whole time in my heart, what I really wanted was the tacos. The coin helped me to look inside my own heart so that I didn't have to like get in my own way in that way anymore. Coins can be really good for this kind of thing. They can also just help you with a yes, no. If you just like don't know if you want to do a thing or not, or if you're, like anytime you've got a binary, coins can be really good for that. Pendulums can also be really good for that kind of thing. You can just like hold your pendulum there and then let it tell you whether or not you should do a thing or whether you actually believe a thing. That's a good one too. Cards can actually be really good also about being like, what am I actually feeling about this? Like, emotions can be very confusing, and body feelings in general, sensations can be kind of confusing a lot of times. And so it's frequently useful. Something about cards is more qualitative. It doesn't do as well with like yes or no a lot of times, but it will give you like qualifications. Whereas something like a pendulum, a coin, or muscle testing is going to be like we're going to do a whole module on it. Don't worry about that right now. But it'll give you information about a yes or a no, and those things can be super important. It's worth thinking into questions that could actually be useful for you if you were to be able to understand them. If you were able to actually get at the information, then you could learn something about that. What questions would you ask to God if you had the chance to do that? Now, the important thing here is that you only ask questions that you actually want the answer to. Don't ask questions that you don't want the answer to, because you will hurt your own feelings. Trust me on this one. Been there a lot of times. Don't trust me on this. Fucking fuck around. Find out for your damn self. I'm telling you, if you ask questions you don't want the answer to, then you are at a high risk of hurting your own feelings. Also, a lot of times if you're asking questions of God or something like that, you're going to get into a lot of like, well, why would you structure things in this way or that way? And a lot of that's not going to be intelligible. So keep it at a scale that you can understand. But, get in there and try to understand, try work on your predictive model with something like a why question, like that, treat that as basic research. You know what I mean? Like, what is the world even made of? What are we even looking at right now? And the better that you can develop your ability to ask good questions, both to cards, divination, other sortilege, and to information sources, and to each other, and even to our own minds, the better we will be at understanding the world at large. That's what I got for you today. Appreciate you.